Out of eyes tryna put me on a t-shirt. Shorty want me so bad, do your knees hurt? Yeah, I'm counting paper guap in my Beamer.
Hey guys, it's Noah Tirabeck, and welcome back to the channel where we take a deep dive into some of the most controversial and complicated topics in history. Today, we're tackling a huge one, and I do mean huge. We're going to explore the rebel flag, or also known as the Confederate battle flag. Specifically, this video called Why the Confederate Flag is Not Racist by the YouTuber Southern Gentleman. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something clear. This is for educational purposes only, and we're going to try to approach this subject with a nuance and context it deserves. History, after all, is rarely black and white, pun intended. But yeah, today we're going to dive into a lot of historical tidbits. So grab your notebooks, folks, because this is going to be a wild ride. Let's get into it. Why are we talking about the Confederate flag? Well, it's one of those symbols that got a lot of baggage. Whether you see it as a symbol of Southern pride, sign of racial oppression, or something else entirely, there's a lot of debate surrounding it. And in this video from Southern Gentleman, the claim is made that the Confederate flag, and by extension, the Confederacy itself, was not inherently racist. Now, before we start throwing around terms like historical revisionism or alternative history, let's take a look at the video's main argument. Southern Gentleman argues that a Confederate flag and a Confederacy were not exclusively about supporting slavery or racism, and that there were actually many non-white people who fought for the Confederacy. Sounds interesting, right? Let's dig in. Alright, let's start with some of the key points from Southern Gentleman's video. The first major claim that they make is that there were a surprising number of non-white people who fought for the Confederacy. They list off a bunch of different ethnic groups who supposedly were involved. Now, I'm not saying we can just ignore this. It's true that there were people of all different backgrounds who fought for the South, including Black, Jewish, Irish, and even Chinese soldiers. Let's break this down, shall we? 10,000 Black Confederates. Wait, what? Did I hear that right? 10,000? Well, according to some sources, there were indeed Black soldiers in the Confederate Army, but the numbers are highly debated. Some historians argue that the figure is inflated, and most of these men were actually used as laborers rather than combatants. Others point to the fact that some were armed and participated in combat. But 10,000? That's a bit of a stretch. 2,500 Hispanic Confederates. Yeah, this one makes sense. The South did have a fair number of Hispanic soldiers, particularly from areas like Texas and Florida, which had strong Spanish colonial influences. Still, they were a relatively small part of the overall army. 3,000 Jewish Confederates. Now, this is interesting. There were indeed some Jewish soldiers in the Confederate Army. One of the most notable was Judah Benjamin, a high-ranking Confederate official. But the idea that Jewish people en masse supported the Confederacy is another claim that needs more nuance. The majority of Jewish people in the South, in fact, opposed slavery. 20,000 Irish Confederates. This one's easier to believe. The Irish had a significant presence in the South, particularly in Louisiana and New Orleans. Many of them fought for the Confederacy, though this was likely more about loyalty to their local communities than an endorsement of slavery. Charles Chan, the Chinese Confederate. Ooh, this is a fascinating one. According to the video, Charles Chan was only a Chinese soldier in the Confederate Army. I mean, it's impossible to believe, but it's certainly a rare piece of history. So yeah, there's truth in some of this, but here's the thing. The presence of non-white soldiers in the Confederate Army doesn't necessarily prove that the Confederacy was free from racism or that the Confederate flag wasn't tied to racism. What this argument seems to be overlooking is the context of these soldiers. Many of them were enslaved people or poor immigrants who had little choice but to join the army, or were coerced or drafted into service. This wasn't a free will situation for many of them, especially for black soldiers. The idea that these groups fought for Southern pride is at best complicated. Many of them fought because they had to, not because they believed in the cause. And don't forget about the fact that the Confederacy was still built on the institution of slavery. Even if some individuals of various ethnic backgrounds fought in the army, it doesn't change the fact that the Confederacy's leadership, the political elite, and the majority of the army were fighting to preserve slavery as an institution. The video also brings up Nathan Bedford Forrest, the famous Confederate general who, according to some sources, later became an advocate for civil rights and worked to dismantle the Ku Klux Klan. And while Forrest did have a complicated post-war relationship with the Klan, he eventually renounced them. It doesn't exactly undo his role in perpetuating a racist system during the war. Plus, this kind of redemption arc for historical figures is always super tricky. Just because someone changed later in life doesn't mean we can ignore their earlier actions. Also, let's not forget that the Confederacy wasn't just fighting to maintain a way of life, it was fighting to maintain slavery, a brutal institution that disproportionately affected black people. And after the war, there was a long history of black disenfranchisement, Jim Crow laws, and systemic racism that carried on long after the Confederate Army was disbanded. The video even pulls out a quote from Robert E. Lee, who says, "While we see the course of the final abolition of human slavery is onward, we give it the aid of our prayers." Now, I'm not going to pretend if I'm an expert on Lee's personal beliefs, but this quote often used to argue that Lee wasn't pro-slavery, rather reluctantly fighting for a cause that he thought was lost. It's true that Lee later expressed personal regret about slavery, but let's be real, he didn't exactly go out of his way to oppose it during the war. This is one of those situations where Lee's personal views are often misused or oversimplified to support a narrative that may or may not reflect the full complexity of the situation. So, is the Confederate flag inherently racist? Well, that's a tough question, and several gentlemen make some points worth considering. But I think we need to understand the larger context. Even if there were diverse groups in the Confederacy, the core reason for its existence was to protect the institution of slavery. And that's something that can be ignored. Now, I see the Confederate flag as a symbol of Southern pride. It's tied to a certain heritage and culture that goes beyond just the ugly parts of history. For many, it represents family, tradition, and a connection to the past. But at the same time, I get why it's controversial. Symbols, especially ones with such a charged history, carry a lot of different meanings for different people. Oh, and here's a fun fact to leave you with. My mom was born in Southern California, and you might be surprised to learn that California actually tried to secede from the Union and become part of the Confederacy during the Civil War. Wild, right? History is full of these unexpected twists. Now look, I get it. History is messy and it's easy to pick out pieces that fit a narrative. But history is more than just numbers and quotes. It's about context, and that's where we need to tread carefully. That's all for today's video, folks. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was the Confederate flag really a symbol of Southern pride, or was it something darker? Drop a like if you found this interesting, and make sure you're subscribed for more deep dives into the past, or other videos that I'm planning to do in the future, like fan-made Blue Schools vids, YouTube hoops, and more. Until next time, I'm Noah Terbeck, your Virginia nationalist, and I'll see you in the next video.